Well, let me start by welcoming you. I'm Naomi Gerstel. I'm chair of the Northampton Neighbors Speakers Committee, and I was a board member. Northampton Neighbors launched 6 years ago to help those of us who are 55 and older stay in our homes and in our apartments in Northampton, Florence, and Leeds, so we could lead full, engaged lives. We became part of a village movement, which is an international movement of such organizations, nonprofits. And it all started when some of us read Atul Gawande's beautifully written Being Mortal, which is about the modern experience of mortality and better approaches to aging. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And we decided to name our group Northampton Neighbors. We did not anticipate how much and how fast it would grow and grow and grow. Now our group has, as of yesterday, 1,759 members. We provide a range of services and connections, including many volunteer opportunities, whether it's for hiking or cooking or going to a mix and mingle, or participating in our listserv, which has taken off incredibly well, where people have set up death cafes, where they've set up Spanish classes, where they talk about growing mushrooms, how to help people with dementia, a very wide range of opportunities. We now co-host, as of a couple months ago, with the Senior Center. And I wanted to name this speaker series, which is one very small part of Northampton Neighbors, itself takes a lot of work. And I wanted to name the invisible labor, all too often invisible labor, that goes into setting up one of these talks. I want to thank Suzanne Wilson, who is part of our communications committee, who works with the speaker to write their announcement, Nina Kleinberg, who is our tech wizard, and the members of our speakers committee, who are Sarah Backrack, Ann Bauer, Jane Flashman, Mark Carpel, Sarah Lennox, and Kim Park. And of course, I want to thank all the speakers over the last 5 years, hundreds of them. They've been wonderful. And we welcome all of you to these events and would love to have you volunteer. You saw how to contact us at the beginning. We know that we are free, unlike most of the other villages in the world. And anyone can join to receive as well as give help. So let me tell you a little bit about the logistics for today. Joe's going to talk for about half an hour and then respond to your questions. We use chat for questions. You see it at the bottom of your screen. All you have to do is tap on chat and be sure after you write in your question to press enter or your question will not appear. And if we have time at the very end, if people want to stay longer, we can have some more open conversation. All mics are going to be muted throughout the talk so we don't hear any dogs barking in the background. If you'd like to read as well as listen, click on CC on the show captions on the bottom of your screen, and everything Joe says will appear on your screen in a written format. Perhaps most importantly, this event is being recorded. If you don't want to show up in a recording, just turn off your camera. If you want to hear it again or recommend it to friends, which I hope you will, this recording will appear shortly on both Northampton Neighbors YouTube, and you can get there directly through the link that was posted on the page at the beginning, as well as through and you can find it on YouTube. So now let me just say a few words about our star attraction. I am delighted to introduce Joe Silverman. He's a retired counseling and school psychologist who has a long and growing history of involvement with issues around climate change, which perhaps began when he participated, I think about 5 decades ago, in the first Earth Day activities. Since then, he has undergone training to be a part of former Vice President Gore's program as a climate reality leader. He knows much about and strongly believes in, as you will see, in local action, which is part of the reason we really wanted him to come speak today. And he is now a member of the Pioneer Valley chapter of the Citizens Climate Lobby, which he will also talk about today. He has done much in his own life. We had conversations before the talk about things he does in his own life to improve climate. He not only does he ride his bicycle many places, but during COVID, he drove out to California to see his grandson a number of times, many of them with an electric car. So he has commitment to climate change and family. And we now want to turn to his talk, which is titled Climate Change, What We Know and What We Can Do. Joe, you're on.
There we go. Thank you, Naomi. That was great. And welcome, and thank you everyone for being here. As Naomi pointed out, I do have a PhD in psychology. I'm not a climate scientist, but I do consider myself a lifelong environmentalist. And what that's meant to me is that, one of the guiding sort of principles that I've sort of held throughout my life is not to squander the Earth's natural resources. So when I started learning about global warming, climate change, fairly early on, I felt like one thing that was missing was sort of a psychological perspective. But I thought psychology had something to offer in terms of thinking about climate change and what solutions might look like. This might be a case of, as the expression goes, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But nevertheless, while it might not be immediately obvious the role that psychology has to play, I hope that that's something that you get out of the presentation I'm going to be talking about today. So the general framework of my presentation is here: what you should know, what can be done, what you can do. In order to talk about solutions, you need to know sort of what causes the problems. So I'll very briefly do sort of the science. As I hope you can appreciate, this is a very big topic. There'll be a handout with all the links to organizations and a lot of materials I'll be talking about. And that's on a Google Doc that Nina will put up in the chat for everyone. This is in 1961, President Kennedy made the pledge that the United States would land a man on the moon. This was referred to as the moonshot. And this is the first shot of the Earth from the moon. And this was also taken from the moon. This is as the edge of the Earth. And what you see there, that thin blue line, is actually the troposphere, which is the lowest layer of the atmosphere. And basically all life on Earth depends on the troposphere. That's where the oxygen is. Above that is the stratosphere. There's not enough oxygen up there to support life. And if the Earth was the size of an apple, the troposphere would be equivalent to the skin on an apple. It's fairly thin. The average height of the troposphere is about roughly 11 miles in the tropics, quite a bit less at the polar regions. And into that thin layer of atmosphere, we're putting a great deal of carbon pollution. I think climate change is difficult to visualize. You look up in the sky, it looks infinite. People don't realize how thin that layer is of atmosphere that supports all of life. And there we are putting in millions of tons of pollution every single day. This chart shows the current levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. Scientists have determined that a safe level is roughly 350 parts per million, which would be around here. The current level is 421. Basically, there has never been a human who has walked on an Earth with the molecular composition of the atmosphere being what it is now. That the scientists talk about this as being sort of drastically out of balance. One interesting fact, a little bit alarming, I'm 72 years old, and 80% of the CO2 in the atmosphere was emitted in the course of my lifetime. So this is, we're talking about geologic time, which is in hundreds of thousands of years, and within one lifetime, these things have changed that dramatically. And this is, you can see the graph of the relationship between temperature and carbon dioxide. So as a result of all these greenhouse gases, temperature rises. And as a result, this is the part of most climate talks where they would show, terrible fires, storms, floods. I'm not going to do that, but here's one chart that shows that the incidence of severe weather events is clearly going up. Now, climate skeptics would say, yeah, that was a bad hurricane. But, in Galveston in 1900, there was a terrible hurricane. And the Mississippi flooded really severely in 1927. So we've always had these things. Well, it's true. We've always had severe weather events. But as you can see by the chart, these things are becoming more frequent, and we know what's causing it. And as a result, it's expected to become more and more an issue. And of course, these things are local. If you have the impression like, well, winter's not what it used to be, well, it isn't what it used to be. Here's Springfield winter warming, average temperature from 1970 to 2023, and temperature has risen 4.8 degrees Fahrenheit. And this past summer, we saw dramatic effects of climate change in this area with floods. So here's where we get to the science part of things. This shows the sources of greenhouse gas emissions. Much of it, 62%, comes from the burning of fossil fuels. Power plants producing electricity, transportation, cars, trucks, heating and cooling buildings, industry, all those things that burn fossil fuels create 62% of the greenhouse gases that's in the atmosphere. CO2 is also released as a result of burning wood, which is a fuel, and fossil fuels are plants that are fossilized through the course of millions of years of geology. But CO2 is being released through land use. A lot of that comes from deforestation. The chemical CO2, that's 3%. Basically, that's a byproduct of the production of concrete and cement. CH4 is methane. That's a very powerful greenhouse gas. That comes from natural gas, like the flaring of gases where they burn off the excess natural gas at fracking wells. Cattle, agriculture, it's cattle burps, part of their digestive system creates methane. Landfills, as organic waste in landfills decompose, they release methane, and rice fields also can do that. So CO2 and methane operates differently in the atmosphere. Methane is very powerful. It's 80 times more powerful as a heat-trapping gas than carbon dioxide, but it also has a short half-life of about 11 years. On the other hand, carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. And obviously, that's what looking forward in time is a great concern. N2O, nitrous oxide, primarily comes from fertilizer used in agriculture. F-gases, also another very intensive heat-trapping gas, is the source of that is refrigerants. The other side of the picture is the sinks. That is what's drawing down CO2 from the atmosphere. And basically, you're talking about forests and the oceans, and that accounts for a little over 40%. And the 59% here, that's what remains in the atmosphere after the sinks do their job of taking some of the pollution out. So let's move on to what can be done. So now we're talking about essentially solutions that are more systemic changes. Sort of as you would expect, a lot of it has to do with the capacity for renewable energy like wind and solar. There's more than enough of both wind and solar to meet all our energy needs. But there are a couple of issues because it's a intermittent energy source. We need storage and the ability to transport the energy from where it's being produced to where it's going to be needed. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the solution that's advocated by or supported by the Citizens Climate Lobby. And what we're talking about there is what's called the carbon fee and dividend, which is considered the best first step for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And it's actually a very simple plan that a fee is charged on fossil fuels at the source. So where it's mined, where it's pumped at the well, a fee is added, but that money gets returned. It's a dividend. that's returned to households as a carbon cashback. And then there's something called a carbon border adjustment, and I'll explain in a little bit what that's about. So the plan that CCL proposes, the fee starts small, just $15 a ton, but then it increases every single year until emissions are reduced. And economists will tell you that what corporations and business likes is essentially predictability. So they will know that, yes, it starts small, but every year it's going to get bigger. So it gives them time to adjust their policies and transition away from the fossil fuels to renewable sources. And the same thing for households. But it's not a tax, it's a fee that's put on. The difference is that a tax, as like we all pay taxes later this month, is that the government collects it and then does what they want with it, whether it's spending on roads or military or whatever. A fee is revenue neutral. So the money's collected by the government, but then it's passed along and returned to households. And the carbon dividend is returned to households in equal shares every month. And research that's been done on this plan will note that because of the fee that's added to fossil fuels, prices of gas and heating oil will go up. But lower income houses that have a smaller carbon footprint, they'll get, in general, as much or possibly even more in the dividend than what they end up spending in extra costs. Larger households that have a larger carbon footprint will end up paying more, but it all sort of equals out. The carbon border adjustment has to do with, well, if the United States is adding a fee onto carbon and greenhouse gases, then the products that are manufactured are going to end up costing more. And how is that going to affect us when we trade with other places? Well, what happens is that if we're exporting to another country that doesn't have a carbon fee, then the manufacturing in the United States gets a rebate. But on the other hand, for the goods that come in from other places, a tariff gets put on them, so that basically the goods an adjustment is made to account for the fact that some countries have a fee on the carbon emissions and others don't. And this, the big question that everybody asks about climate solutions is, well, what about China, which is the largest current emitter of greenhouse gases? Well, China is very, their manufacturing is pretty dirty compared to the United States, and they depend highly on trade. So this policy would have a huge impact on them, and likely they would need to impose a carbon fee themselves to sort of equal things out. So I'm going to demonstrate the effect of this carbon fee, energy innovation, and carbon dividend plan of CCL using what's called the En-ROADS Climate Simulator. So this is an online tool. Your website, the website to access this is going to be in that handout, and there's no login required. Everybody can look at it and kind of play around with it. It's pretty amazing simulator. So let me explain what you're looking at here. So on the left-hand side, we have the global sources of primary energy: coal, oil, natural gas, and the green is renewables. And on the right-hand side, this is looking at greenhouse gas net emissions, and this is the final temperature. And this is the trajectory of what we're looking at right now. This is 200 to 2100. Built into the model is the fact that renewables are going to increase dramatically in size. But still, at this rate, we're moving towards about 6 degrees Fahrenheit warming, which basically it's kind of, we don't want to get there. It's not going to be pretty. So I'm going to show what's going to happen, when people think about, well, what are the solutions to climate change? The first thing they think about is, well, we're going to have to get a whole lot more clean energy. So you see that down here we have the different interventions, and I've moved the slider on renewables all the way to the right so that it's highly subsidized. You can, on the slider, move it different gradations along that, but moving it all the way to the side, as you see, it didn't make a huge difference. So the black line, again, is the trajectory, and the intervention we made by moving that slider is the blue line. And we haven't come down a whole lot in final temperature. The green space got much bigger here, but we're still burning a lot of fossil fuels. So now I'm going to do the other intervention that people talk about a lot, is planting a whole lot more trees. So renewables are back to where they were. Afforestation, which is basically adding a lot of tree planting. I moved that all the way to the top, and still not a huge kind of impact in terms of final temperature. But now I'm going to change carbon price. I'm going to put in there the numbers that I just talked about in terms of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act from CCL. And this is what happens when we do that. So what the green space obviously gets much, much bigger. But the big difference here is that because it's more expensive, use of coal, oil, and natural gas decreases dramatically. And you see final temperature is much, much, much lower. Now, that's still not where we want to be. The IPCC and the Paris Agreement says we want to get well below 2 degrees centigrade and as close as we can to 1.5. So let's add a few things to what I just did there. So now we're looking at more energy efficiency in transportation and in buildings, stopping some of the cutting down of trees that's been going on, reducing methane, a little bit of carbon capture, planting some trees, and now the numbers are a level that still is going to have a fair amount of weather impacts, but we're getting very close to what the Paris Agreement suggests we need to get to in terms of a final temperature. In terms of climate solutions, if people aren't familiar with Project Drawdown, I think it would be a great thing to explore. This is Paul Hawken on the left here. He's more of like an environmentalist entrepreneur. And somewhere around 2013, he said, well, everybody's talking about climate change, but I don't hear much people really talking about solutions. Is it possible to reverse climate change? So he recruited a couple of hundred scientists, researchers, students, and they looked at all the possible solutions and measured. They did the math on which ones are going to be most effective. Paul Hawken passed on the leadership of Project Drawdown to this guy, Jonathan Foley, who is a climate scientist. It's very worthwhile sort of taking a look at their website. They have something called the Drawdown Roadmap, which is a plan for implementing these solutions in a way that makes sense, that can get us to where we need to be. And you can look through all what they call the solutions library, and they quantify them in terms of just how effective that solution is going to be in terms of reducing carbon emissions. When they did the numbers, a couple of surprising things came up in terms of some of the things that had a huge impact that maybe weren't expected. One was educating girls and family planning. If you look at population numbers, actually people, are very aware China and India have the huge population, but really the biggest growth is projected to happen in what's called the global south. And the best way to, the best climate solution there is empowering and educating girls and women. And this can have a huge impact in terms of a future global temperature. The other has to do with the food agricultural sector. Now, this is not addressed as much in terms of clean energy, but it's a huge impact. So reducing food waste ends up being one of the top climate interventions. It takes a lot of greenhouse gases to produce food, and 1/3 of the food that's produced gets wasted. If it ends up in landfills, then it ends up emitting methane. So that's a huge issue. One other solution I want to talk about, though, both those, En-ROADS and Project Drawdown are kind of, big picture systemic solutions. Drawdown, if you look through all the solutions, there are some things that could have applications for communities. So we'll talk about that a little more. But this is something that a lot of people aren't aware of. The Earthshot Prize was started by Prince William. His family actually have been environmentalists for many years. And what they do is they search the globe and they look for people who are basically being sort of climate heroes. There are 5 categories they look for: protect and restore nature, clean our air, revive our oceans, build a waste-free world, fix our climate. In each of these categories, it's been going on for 3 years. They identify 3 finalists. And the winner of each of those categories gets £1 million to sort of continue their work. It's kind of cool because these are just people who are have these great ideas, and some are, obviously well educated and have some skills, and other people are just local heroes who decide to mobilize folks in their community to do good work. So I'll highlight just a few of them. This is a fellow in the country of Oman who found that there is a substance in the soil. Peridotite is a particular rock that it absorbs and mineralizes carbon dioxide. So it does it naturally over the course of many years, and he found a way to accelerate it. And he thinks that this could be a key part of solving the climate problem by scaling up this problem. This is a woman from Kenya who found that the way that the traditional way of cooking in Kenya was dangerous. It emitted a lot of smoke. It was usually charcoal or wood, so it wasn't great for the climate. And her daughter was severely burned by the cook stove. So she found a way to do it better. So it was cleaner, less emitting, and also cheaper. This is a fellow in the UK who was concerned about the amount of plastic in packaging. And he found an alternative using seaweed that has 20 times the carbon as compared with trees. That absorbs 20 times the amount of CO2 from the atmosphere. And he's able to use that to make a replacement for plastic packaging. So these are just 3 of the people. There's more about them. There are YouTubes explaining, and because they've been doing this program for 3 years, 15 finalists in each of those 5 categories. So then there are now 45 folks who are doing some amazing stuff. I found it very, it inspired hope and optimism to see what some of these people are doing. So now let's focus on, what you can do. And here I'm talking about sort of the collective you, not just includes you individually, but what individuals can do. And the first step on that might be to look at what are people's attitudes about climate change. Now, let me show you what's going on here. These are what's called the climate maps from the Yale Program for Climate Change Communication. Each of these little boxes represent polling that's done in a county all across the United States. If you look at this legend over here, the areas that are in red are the numbers in that polling were greater than 50%. But in the shade where it's just barely a little red, it's just barely over 50%. So the darker the shade, the more extreme the result is. But across the country, people understand that climate change is happening. Now, if you change the question to, do people think that scientists think global warming is happening? All of a sudden, it's a very different picture. Many parts of the country, they don't think there is scientific consensus about global warming. And then when the question is, do you think global warming, climate change is going to affect you personally? Well, now it gets deep blue. People don't see that it's really going to change their lives in any kind of way. And then when the question is, do you have conversations? Do you talk about climate change, at least occasionally? Almost across the country, it's blue, and in some places, very deep blue. So people are not talking about it. So my takeaways from this is that people are noticing across the country that the climate is changing, but they're not attributing it to climate change. They're not connecting the dots between the science and what they're observing happening. And when you get to this, is that even the people who understand the science and who are concerned, they're not really actively engaged in talking about it and probably in doing much about it. Now and this is reflected, of course, in elections. So if you look at the top priorities during elections, here it is for 2010, global warming is right at the bottom. And this has been pretty true for essentially every election that's been held in the United States. 2018, same thing. This is the top. So this is a poll of if voters were asked, what is your top priority? What do you think is the most important thing that's going to sort of determine who you vote for? And this was the 2022, just recently, midterm votes. And 4% of the people said that the climate and the environment was their top priority. And this is reflected throughout the country. So this is a polling that was done of all the countries in the G20, and by a pretty good margin, the United States was way at the bottom. But on the other hand, so you have on the one hand, public engagement, which is pretty scarce and not what it should be. And this is from 1997. So in 97, 1,700 world scientists signed this letter. This is just the top part of it, a screenshot of, and this is also on the handout. And this was including a majority of the Nobel laureates in the sciences who signed this. And they say, we warn all humanity of what lies ahead. A great change in our stewardship of the earth is required if vast human misery is to be avoided. And scientists continue to try to issue warnings. So this is the 25th anniversary of that statement. They're basically restating it. We are now at code red on planet Earth. So there's this huge chasm between public engagement and the severity of the climate threats. And maybe this is where, from my point of view, psychology enters into it. This is from a group called the Potential Energy Coalition. John Marshall is a marketing professor at Dartmouth. And he says climate change has a marketing problem. People don't understand it, therefore they don't care about it as much as they should. And since people don't seem to care, climate change gets deprioritized. And they did a recent study called Later is Too Late. It's a piece, you can look at the website. It's an amazing piece of work. And John Marshall used the tools of marketing analytics to say, well, this is what marketing people do all the time. Well, let's test our message and see how effective it is. And this is the world of advertising, right? So he's taken his skills and say, well, how do we brand and advertise climate change in a way that's going to be effective? Because obviously what we're doing has not been very effective. So what politicians often talk about is increasing jobs and economic growth or reducing social inequality. And those were not very effective messages. What was most effective is protecting the planet for future generations. And he has summed it up in terms of the title of this publication, Later is Too Late. And if you want to give it one word, word might be love. Love for our children and concern about the future that they're going to be facing, and also love for the planet and the nature that we want to protect. So his feeling is if we can change the messaging, we can shift things around to increase public engagement. And this is something that shares, it seems like almost every issue you find, there's a huge partisan divide in the United States, great polarization. But this is something I think, by and large, everybody can agree with, is wanting to care about the future for our children and wanting to preserve nature as it is. So I think part of the problem is that the messaging about climate change has been, well, what you do as an individual really doesn't make much of a difference. You can change all the light bulbs in the house that you want, but really it's all about what government is going to do, what the big corporations are going to do. But I think this has been kind of a catch-22. It's human nature to hear that when the message is what you do doesn't matter, well, then people are going to disengage. They're going to move on to something else. Why should I bother stressing about something? Because what I do isn't going to make a difference anyway. So I see this as kind of a catch-22, that people have been sort of disengaged because they're told what their individual actions might or might not be is not going to make a huge difference. But then as a result, the systemic changes because you have politicians who don't act, because if their constituents are not concerned on an issue, why should they address it and alienate the people who are voting for them? And same with businesses who, the individuals are the consumers for what businesses produce. So I see this as kind of a catch-22 that has really provided an obstacle to progress on climate. And climate change can elicit negative feelings. It can make us feel anxiety, feeling overwhelmed, despair, sadness, anger, guilt. That when these things come up, as a psychologist, I know that psychological defenses kick in. People don't like feeling those things, so they avoid a topic. They repress it. I'm just not going to think about it. They rationalize, well, everybody's doing it, or it's not really going to make a difference, or they engage in denial. There are more defenses I could have put up there, but I didn't. As a therapist, I know that the first step to dealing with problems is to stop avoiding them, stop denying them, to become aware of the defenses that are being employed as a way of facing the feelings. If you're anxious about something, you're never going to get past the anxiety if you continue to avoid whatever it is that's making you anxious. So, and sadness and despair, when I would treat patients with depression, the response was often get active, do something. Find an activity that makes you feel engaged. So, the old Smokey the Bear, only you can prevent. Now, I'm not saying that what you do can prevent climate change, but I am saying that climate change is not going to be, and actually the word prevent is probably the wrong word here. It's too late to prevent climate change. So let's change that to reverse climate change. But climate change is not going to be reversed without public engagement, so that we can't fix it. We're not responsible for the problem, but we need to be active in order to solve the problem, because only when we are engaged will the systemic changes that need to happen start happening. Kermit, it's not easy being green. When you look into, I think one of the takeaways from what I'm saying here is that this is a really complex, multifaceted problem. It's not a simple thing to live a sustainable life. It's an ideal, and we should all sort of shoot for that as a goal. But it's constant work to sort of monitor and learn. So what can you do? Well, reading about the problem, learning about what it takes is important. Talking about it, getting engaged with it, and getting active, I think, are all things that can be done. Now it gets to sort of the typical solutions. That is, how do you reduce your carbon footprint? We all have one. We all do things every single day that have climate impacts. What you wear, what you buy or not buy, what you drive, everything we do has a climate impact. It's pretty overwhelming. First step is to electrify. That's where the government's IRA, and this is a government publication that gives us some good information on the rebates that are available. Changing your heating system to mini splits. If you have a roof with a good solar exposure, by all means, you should get solar panels on there. In the course of the life of the solar panels, you're going to save yourself tens of thousands of dollars. Now, right away, there's an upfront cost, but over time, you will save a lot of money. Now, if you're switching everything to electricity, I'm not sure everybody pays attention to where is that coming from. In Massachusetts, where we have a good thing going in that there's a website, energyswitchma.gov. You put in your zip code, and it'll tell you what your options are in terms of who your supplier of electricity is. Now, the distributor might be National Grid or Eversource, but they're going to get the energy from other places. So if you'd need to do two things, as much as possible, transfer from burning fossil fuels to everything being electric, but then making the choice to go with renewable sources for that electricity. I think most everybody knows that what you eat, mostly or solely plants, is the climate active thing to do, and shopping for food being organic and local. Talked about one of the sources of greenhouse gases is the nitrous oxide that is used in conventional agriculture. There's the traditional way of farming, particularly with the big corporate farms, doesn't do much in terms of sequestering carbon in the soil, but organic farming, regenerative agriculture is the way to go. So if you buy food local and hence avoiding, shipping, which also, if you buy fruit from Chile or New Zealand, they had to get to the supermarket in some way. If you buy things local and eat local, then it's a more climate-friendly thing to do. How you get around obviously makes a difference. Electric cars, electric buses. The word co-benefits, I put that here because, biking and walking obviously are good alternatives in terms of getting around, but they also make you healthy. And, that's also the element of this whole thing, which is really, really important, which is that the steps that we take to combat and reverse climate change also have a lot of benefits. That's called co-benefits. One of the major ones being health. If we're not burning fossil fuels, air and rates of asthma will go down because they're currently extremely high. Some of that doesn't get a whole lot of attention. I get very irritated when I see someone using a gas-powered leaf blower. Seems very unnecessary, and that lawn equipment has a lot of toxic fumes. Battery-powered lawn equipment has gotten a lot better, and grass as a whole doesn't do a whole lot for the environment, but having pollinators instead would be a good step. Travel, that tends to be my guilty pleasure, and it's not just a pleasure. Having a family out in California means we end up flying to go visit them when I'm not driving. But when I do fly, I buy carbon offsets. I put on there plan B only because, the best thing to do for the climate is not to fly and not to emit gases. But when I do, I look for a good carbon offset. But I have on there, beware of corporate greenwashing. A lot of corporations are saying, well, we're going to be net zero, carbon neutral by 2040. And the way they're doing that in many cases is not actually reducing their emissions in their manufacturing process, but by buying carbon offsets. And this guy down here, Ben Elgin from Bloomberg News, has done some good investigative reporting, basically finding that a lot of it is what's called greenwashing, giving a veneer of doing the right thing when in fact what they're doing is not doing much of anything. And of course, the election coming up is a major thing that needs to happen in terms of continuing the momentum. I don't think our planet can stand another 4 years of our climate denier in chief. And so these organizations are all nonpartisan organizations, but they all are focused on getting out the vote. And from everything I've read, that's really what it's at, where it's at in terms of the election going the way of the climate. Movement Voter Project, as people probably know, was started by a local Northampton resident, Billy Wimsatt. Headcount focuses on the youth vote. These bottom two, Environmental Voter Project and Vote Forward, you could donate to any of those organizations. I tend to do that these days instead of just giving to the national organization. I think my political donations go further by donating to one of these organizations that fund grassroots organizations and such. But those last two, you can be more active in terms of postcard writing or making calls to people identified. Now there's a lot of talking about voting priorities. There are so many issues that progressive voters like myself care about, whether it's abortion rights, voter rights, gun control, systemic racism, lists can go on and on. But in my opinion, if we don't fix this, nothing else will matter. So this, to my mind, this needs to be the priority. And the other thing that people can do is divest from fossil fuels. So what's in your wallet? I don't have a $100 bill in my wallet, but I do have credit cards. And this organization, this website will tell you which banks fund fossil fuels. There are a lot of options for credit cards from other sources, even local sources, and looking at also your IRA, so your savings. This website will tell you the mutual funds, how much of the mutual fund is invested in fossil fuel extraction. And when you donate, this is pretty concerning. Philanthropy is a huge thing in terms of the amount of, billions of dollars that are philanthropists give, but it's really unfortunate that so little of it goes to climate change mitigation. Hopefully that will change sometime soon. And, I've talked about the systemic solutions, individual behaviors, but really the sweet spot in a lot of climate solutions is community and local. There's a lot of things that we can do right here in Northampton that can make a huge difference. And finally, there are activist groups. Third Act was started by Bill McKibben, who's a real climate change hero. He started the group 350.org. He organized the 2017 Climate March. I went to New York City down for that. He's the author of about 17 books. He's been arrested multiple times, demonstrating here and there. This is a advocacy activist group that's focused on Americans over the age of 60. So I think that's a pretty cool thing. And his point of view is that, wait a minute, this is a cohort that back in the 60s was very activist and helped stop the Vietnam War and kind of forced a president to resign. These people have some good experience about making big changes. Let's get them together and doing the right thing here. And of course, locally, we'd love to have you join us in the Citizens Climate Lobby. We meet once a month. But on the handout, I also mentioned, I think it's 4 or 5 other local groups and a contact information for those organizations. So let's get going. Thank you. And I guess I'm ready for Q&A.
Oh my goodness, thank you. Thank you for a great talk. And thank you for all the work you do. It's really inspiring. This was really wonderful. So I just want to mention who our next speaker is. It's Elisa Klein, who's the Executive Director of Grow Food Northampton. And she's going to give a talk on Zoom titled Food and Farming Justice, Getting to Know Grow Food in Northampton. And she's also a terrific speaker. So we look forward to that. As you know, what we do now is use chat for questions. A number of people already put questions in chat, and some people sent me questions before the talk, so I'll raise some of those. So I think we don't clap because we discovered it doesn't work well in chat, but I'm sure everybody wants to give you an enormous
right.
Clap for doing such a terrific job. Thank you, Joe. So let's now go to the Q&A. So let me start with a question I got in the mail, an email before the talk. Then I'll turn to some on chat, and then I'll turn to some more that I got if we have time. So Ann Bauer wrote, I'd like to know more about how important it is for all of us to transition to electric vehicles. I have heard downsides about making the batteries, disposing of them. Would it be better to transition through hybrids first? I gather if all of Massachusetts moves to EVs, this would have a significant impact on greenhouse gases. How much?
Well, it's been studied. As you know, there's a huge industry funded by people like the Koch brothers and the fossil fuel industry to sort of try to downplay the effectiveness of electric vehicles. But there have been a number of really good studies to say that the ultimate climate impact, uh, it's still a positive, a clear benefit to the climate to have electric vehicles. Um, Hybrid vehicles, I'm concerned because we really need to eliminate emissions to the degree possible. So I think it depends in part of your driving habits. If it's a plug-in hybrid and the great majority of your driving is within, let's say you get 50 miles of range, that's all electric, then I think the hybrid would be a good choice. If you're doing a lot of driving where you're going beyond the range of what you can do on electric only, then I would say that going all electric might be the way to go. I think there's been a lot of concern. I think part of the issue is that all of this the transition is going to take some time. It is concerning that with excess demand for electricity, both in terms of cars and I've read that AI is going to have a huge drain on electricity. It's very electricity intensive. And it's a question of, where is all that electricity going to come from? So I think it's going to be a rough period to sort of put in all of the renewable energy sources, the solar and the wind. That's really necessary to meet all the demand. And then one of the other priorities of Citizens Climate Lobby that I didn't really talk about is called permitting reform. That currently, it's pretty obvious that most of the solar and wind is going to be generated in parts of the country, particularly in the middle parts of the country. And where that electricity needs to be used are where the populations are, which is more the coast. To get it from one place to another right now is really difficult. So Congress is actually working on this. It's something that to some degree, Democrats and Republicans do agree on. However, the Republicans would say they want to see permanent reform go through for the sake of moving oil and gas more efficiently, as opposed to renewable energy, but one way or another. So there are some obstacles that need to come about to really make the transition for large segments of the population having electric vehicles. I'm not as concerned. I think technology around the battery is going to get better. Yeah, it's a little concerning now in terms of where the lithium is going, but I think that's not as big a concern as the fact that we're heating up the planet. We need to stop that as soon as possible.
Okay, so let's turn to a little bit to the questions, of which there are a number on the chat box. Rachel Naismith asks, do you think that the reason climate change is so low on people's concerns might be because people feel powerless, or it won't happen in my lifetime, or humans should be able to do whatever they want? Wait, I've lost. Not just that they don't understand it.
Yeah, well, I think that was the point I tried to make in my presentation, that I think people do feel kind of powerless, and I think that was a mistake. I think that people need to feel empowered and engaged. Psychologists have this term self-efficacy. If you feel that what you do can make a difference, then you are more likely to be proactive. but I feel like sort of the messaging around the climate has made people feel sort of hopeless and worthless. So right, so they weren't engaged. Um, but we need people to feel like what you do does make a difference. And I think it does. Yes, it needs to happen. People need to feel engaged in order for this systemic changes to happen, in part for voting. But we're consumers. Ultimately, people have the power, both in terms of voting, but also consuming that we're buying the products made by industries that are polluting, and so we have some power there. I think people have not felt empowered, but if they did, it would make a huge difference.
I'd like to ask a question. One of the things I worry about sometimes is some of the solutions are costly for individuals, so
Mhm.
that people who are more affluent can afford the kinds of solutions you're talking about. What are
Right.
the efforts that are made to work cross-class? And is that true? Is it more likely to be affluent folks who support engaged activities to support the environmental activities?
Well, I think by and large, the research will say that people who have a lot of money don't care because they have enough money to do whatever they want, so they can take as many plane flights as they want, and they can build their big houses. So uh, they tend not to be the activists, I think. Uh, it is true that lower income people, Bill Gates in his book talks about this in terms of what he calls the green premium. Um, but then the greater demand there is for a product, prices tend to come down. So yeah, sometimes doing the right thing is a little more expensive. If people can afford it, then they should do it. The people who can afford it should do it. And people who are at the lower income should not feel guilty that they're spending their money the way they need to get by and feed their family and whatever. And that's where the government needs to step in. And there are a lot of incentives. So a lot of the rebates and incentives in the IRA are income dependent, so that people who don't have much income can afford it. Some of the legislatures in Massachusetts are looking into creation of a climate bank, which is that for families, say, who can't afford putting in solar panels, they would get a loan to help them to put them on their roof, and then they'd be able to pay out over time. So I I think some of the products are more expensive. I think the more people use them, the prices will come down, and the people who can afford to do these things should do those things.
Good answer. Wendy Berg asked, could you please explain Citizens Climate Lobby a bit more?
Okay, Wendy. So Citizens Climate Lobby is nonpartisan. Uh, they work with members of Congress. So it's mostly about what the name says, lobbying. So it's about trying to get members of Congress to do the right thing, to advocate and pass legislation that's going to make a difference. The Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act that I described has been the #1 goal of CCL for years, although they recently expanded their priorities. I think in part they were reflecting the reality that Congress and politics has changed. So these days, their other priorities are protect forests, electrify buildings. I talked about that, and then the permitting reform that I also described. Um, it's uh, it's a it's an organization that really gets into the weeds. It's a bit, my perspective is that it's for people who really want to know the details of how Congress works, how politics works, what good legislation looks like, and wants to have conversations with members of Congress that shows respect for them, no matter what side of the aisle they're on, and is able to talk a language that politicians will acknowledge and respect. So they try their best to build relationships in a positive way with all members of Congress to influence what happens there.
Sarah Backrack sent a question saying, we all may have tons of old light incandescent bulbs. Toss them or use them?
Awesome. You save money. I switched all my light bulbs to contact fluorescence, and then turns out that those were, not as efficient, and they also had mercury in them, which is a whole other thing. So disposing of them was an issue. LEDs have come a long way, and they last a whole lot longer. Initially, the light that they produced was not very appealing, but they've really improved. So, they last longer. They're not that expensive, and it saves quite a bit of electricity. So a lot of your electric bill comes from the lighting. So there's no reason not to toss the incandescent and to switch over to LEDs.
So there are a number of more questions. Here's what I think we're going to do. I'll ask one more question that's on the chat, and then if people are starting to peel off.
Mm-hmm.
And what we can do is have a more interactive discussion where people raise their hands and go to the top of the list if they raise their hands. Let me ask one more question, and then we'll go to leave people a moment to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And then we will try the more interactive. Does that sound good, Joe?
Sure, that's great.
Okay, so Brian Adams asks, what are your thoughts on large-scale solar in Western Mass?
I've read studies that say that there's enough space on degraded landfills to put solar. We don't need to be cutting down huge swaths of forest in order to put in solar arrays. I think there's no reason not to do a lot of solar, and a lot of good reasons to do it. But you need to be a little more cautious about siting it and where it goes. As I said, I've read some studies that looked at the property and decided there's enough land that's basically not being used effectively, and it's not fulfilling any function, not trees that are sequestering carbon, that we don't need to be cut down trees to do that.
Okay, so we now have a lot of people saying what a great talk it was. Those aren't questions, those are comments. You'll get all of these comments.
Yeah, I'm seeing the comments. Thank you to everyone. And in the little chat.
Dorothy Ward, you wrote people should know about mass safety. You want to say something about that, or shall we go to the new interactive style?
No, let me say something about mass save.
Okay.
So sort of it's interesting what's happened with mass save. When I first started looking at this, everything I read was that, boy, Massachusetts has the best program in the entire country. Mass save is sort of a model for all of the states about what should be happening to help citizens make a good transition. Lately, it's not been so positive. There are some people who are saying, well, because the people who sort of are designated to run mass save are the electric companies and the natural gas companies. And people are wondering, well, don't they have sort of a conflict of interest to sort of encourage clean energy when they're making money from fossil fuel industries? Lately, people are a little not so happy, and I'm not sure if that's because, well, I don't know why that is. I suspect it's because of after the IRA, they just got overwhelmed that so many people were trying to take advantage of the rebates available through the IRA that everybody was calling mass save. So at this point, it's the only game in town that in order to access a lot of the benefits of a transition to clean energy, that you have to go through mass save. Um, um, but um, uh, but apparently there's been some discussion on a statewide level about how it's operating and whether or not it's being as efficient as it should be.
This is from Sarah Lennox. She sent a number of very good questions, but um, um, let me try this one. Do you think do you think there's any way at all to get through to Trump supporters about the urgency of this issue?
Um, well, I think, the Primary Energy Coalition work, the later is too late. They've done studies to show that, yeah, you can get through to those folks. Now, I think there are some diehard Trump supporters that no matter what you say or do, they're going to sort of listen to him. But I don't think that's all of them. So, what his numbers are, maybe during his presidency, he had 40% approval rating, and it sounds like it's still roughly in that number. And again, I don't know. I'd just be guessing about the number of diehard supporters that we're never going to reach. The Yale Program for Climate Change Communication did a study where it indicated that the idea that, yes, indeed, there really is scientific consensus that virtually all climate scientists and scientists agree that the Earth is warming and human activity is responsible, served as sort of a gateway belief. That is, and what was interesting is they measured the impact of that message with people on both sides of the political divide. And it was most effective on people who were previously skeptical. And then they did follow-up research, and their change in attitudes actually persisted over time. So I think that people have bought into some of the disinformation that's been promoted by Fox News and some of the other right-wingers. But if you can get through with a good message to convince them, I think, I fantasize like a lot of people do. What would you do if you won the lottery? For me, it would be sending out a message to the tens of thousands of scientists who are out there who are concerned about this. Make little short videos, have them, speak to the camera, because I think, the power of video and personal communication is really special. So if people actually heard in short videos, scientists talking about how concerned they are, and yes, we know this is a problem, I think it could make a huge difference. So I guess it goes back to, for me, it's a communication and marketing kind of problem. I don't think it's been sort of communicated in a way that's effective. And I think with I don't know, a huge percentage, but a fair percentage of Trump supporters, if they were exposed to the message in a way that was effective, I think it could have an impact.
There is another question on the chat, if we could go to that, or unless somebody wants to start by going to the head of the line, hitting react. Does anybody?
This is working fine. Yeah.
Is somebody up there? Am I missing something?
No, there's nobody there.
Okay.
So let's do it this way.
Andrew Kuther, I may be mispronouncing your name. If so, I apologize. It says, is that model that predicts global temperature after various actions available on the web? That was a great thing you did.
Isn't that cool? The En-ROADS.
Yeah,
No. You go to the website and it's there. So it's free, it's accessible. You can
Which website?
Sliders.
Which website?
I think the question was about the En-ROADS climate simulator. Is that right?
Because, yeah, but what website do people go to get, which website do they go to get that?
It's called En-ROADS.
Oh, En-ROADS. Okay. Sorry.
And it's done by Climate Interactive. So there's a Climate Interactive website and then En-ROADS. So both of those are on the handout. And yes, and I also put in a link to a workshop. I've given workshops on En-ROADS. Obviously I just did it really quickly. But it's worthwhile going through the entire process of learning. There are dozens and dozens of graphs and charts and all kinds of cool things you can do with that climate simulator. You can show the impact of, how many deaths are there going to be projected based on, temperature at this level. What are the floods going to look like if sea level rises X amount? It's a very sophisticated, amazing tool, and it's free. It's there, so anybody can go on the website and play around with it, or you could go view a video of someone going through a whole workshop, or you can get in touch with me, and if we get enough people together, I'll do a whole workshop for you on it. I went through the training to become what's called a En-ROADS Climate Ambassador, which means, I know about how to manipulate the model.
And I don't know if you said this, that you put together, I think Nina said it, you put together a long list of resources, which is going to be a link on the YouTube, and then Joe it's going to be a Google Doc that Joe can update. So it'll be quite a neat resource for the local area.
Just put a link to that doc in the chat. So if they go to the chat and they click it, they will go right to that document.
That's great. Okay. And I skipped a question by Rachel Naismith because she already asked one, but I think I was wondering this too. Can you give an example of carbon offsets that you do when you fly?
Carbon offsets, that what?
You do when you fly?
Yeah. It sort of irritates me when you buy a plane ticket these days. They want you to, give them a little extra money to supposedly offset the travel you're doing. I don't trust that United Airlines is going to, after they already kind of try to get me to spend $100 just to have enough leg room, so I'm not chewing on my knee while I'm on my flight. I'm not going to give them $5 to supposedly offset. I don't trust that they're going to be doing good business. So, I spend a fair amount of time on the internet looking at the different sites. And it's hard to say. So in my handout, I list, I think, 3 or 4 of the ones that I think look to me like they're reputable. There's a cool organization called Sea Trees. There's been some pretty interesting, good research showing that one of the most effective ways of sequestering carbon has to do with kelp forests and seagrass, and within the ocean, besides the fact that we want to sort of preserve the oceans because we like them, that's a good way to offset carbon emissions. And Sea Trees is an organization that plants. They do work in Africa for the mangrove forests on the coast, which helps protect the coast from storms in Africa, which have been hit pretty hard. So they do a lot of cool stuff. That's one of the organizations. TerraPest, WREN, WREN is another one. So there are the ones, there are organizations that supposedly verify that the carbon offsets are legitimate. I don't know how that process, how empirically determined those things are, but anyway, the websites I have on my handout are ones that look good to me, that I feel are probably pretty valid. And basically, I don't trust any big corporation that is saying, well, we're going to offset your carbon, so give us money.
Well, I think we've got no one who's gone to the top of the pile, and we're running out of time anyway. So thank you so much. And Joe said you could contact him. He has this fabulous list online, and we thank you for volunteering to give this terrific talk and doing the work you do.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who participated.